Hello everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Dr. Mohammed Sohail Khan. In this particular session, I will be talking about socializing, orienting, and developing employees. Just to have an overview that where the socialization process basically fits in the whole HRM stream. So most of the text talks about the HRM functions, the basic HRM functions. Then they move to strategic HRM, then human resource planning and job analysis. Then that text talks about the recruitment process, selection process, and finally the socialization process. So the socialization process basically came after the recruitment and selection process. Just think about the first bullet that's here. So it says that they're hired, now what? Just think about the first day or the first week that you have been employed by any organization. So you maybe feel a little bit of anxiety, some kind of uncertainty. There will be definitely much more stress and a fear as well once you step into the organization. So this is basically what socialization is for. So socialization process basically try to overcome all those signs. So for example, they are basically developed in a way that employees' anxiety level should be lower or their stress and fear level should be lowered down. So how HR basically helps employees to get socialized into an organization? Or the first question would be why HR should help, or why organization should help its employees to become socialized. It has been talked about through research that ideally the employees who kind of really understand the working environment of the organization are more productive in some way. So socialization process basically helps employees to well adjust into that organization so that they become more productive for that organization. And definitely there is always a component of employee retention. Most of the organization, I should say that all of the organization really want their employees to be with them for a longer period of time. So employee retention is a key that can be gained through the socialization process. There is also like some inside passage of socialization process. So socialization process basically helps an outsider, for example, your potential employee, to become an insider of the organization process. So for socialization process deals with the onboarding of the process. So it's more about the adaptation of the new work role. So for example, how the organization policies basically works in actual into the organization. Definitely there's some assumptions of the socialization process. So assumption means that there are kind of set kind of thinking that why socialize process, why organizations should utilize socialization process. So for example, the first assumption is the socialization process strongly influences employee performance and organizational stability. As I already talked about, the socialization process helps employees to from becoming an outsider to insider. So it gives a view of organization to the employees, that how this organization basically works. So once employee uh, is putting their effort or understands the environment of that organization, their productivity will increase, and definitely it will also help in terms of organizational performance and organizational stability. Second, new members suffer anxiety. So one of the assumption is that basically all of the new members really are kind of suffer from anxiety. So socialization process helps the new members in terms of lowering their anxiety levels. Third is socialization needs to be consistent with the organization culture. I think so. This is really important point in here, because socialization process basically tells employees what is organization culture. So for example, in socialization process, employees will get to know about the norms, attitude, policies of that organization as well. So for example, the politics of the organization, how organization works, how the work is being done in that organization. So if organization process is not consistent with the with the organization culture, it will be hard for the employees to adjust in that culture, because the new employees haven't been told about the socialization, about the culture in the socialization process. So it will be harder or difficult for the new employees if the socialization process is inconsistent with the culture. Number four, individual adjust in new situations in similar ways. So for example, there is a common perception, or there is a common assumption that the new employees always have some kind of anxiety or stress or fear level in them. So for example, once they are being socialized, or once they enter into the new socialization process or the onboarding process, it will help those employees to adjust into a new environment. And most of the socialization process is same for the newcomer. So for example, if an organization hires a new batch, so they all been through the same socialization process. So definitely there would be customization in terms of where they will be working, but there will be some generalization process that each and every employee needs to follow. So what is basically the socialization process? Socialization process basically talks about the three stages that employees needs have or had been gone through, or what most of the employees really faces in that in their organizational life. So for example, there's a first stage that we call pre-arrival stage, then there's an encounter stage, and then there's a metamorphosis stage. So for example, pre-arrival stage basically talks about the set of the values and attitudes that employee had in his or her mind before joining the organization. So we are talking about the organizational image. So we are talking about the previous experience in working in a similar kind of organization. So for example, if I had been working in a software industry or software organization before joining to another organization that is also engaged in the software production, I had some kind of experiences of that organization that I may carry into the new organization. So for example, there is always a set of norms that you already had once you worked in a similar industry. So that's basically all about the pre-arrival stage of the socialization. Then there's a whole stage of encounter stage of socialization. So encounter stage is when basically a new employee has to encounter the new stage. So for example, once the new employee enter into the new organization, that is basically the encounter stage. So where individual discover how well their expectation means that their previous expectation, the expectation that were from the pre-arrival stage, how their expectation basically encounters with the current culture. So this is the whole this stage is basically the encounter stage. Then there's a whole stage of metamorphosis stage talks about the adaptation of the employee into the new environment. So that adaptation means, for example, somehow if I want to acquire that new environment, whether I want to change that new environment or I want to adapt myself according to the new environment. For example, if I feel that this process of socialization, or this process of culture is much more closer to my uh, pre-arrival state, so maybe it will be easier for me to accept that culture. And for example, if it's not, then maybe I'll just go for either changing that culture, or maybe try to adopt that culture in some way. Again, as I already talked about the outsider insider perspective. So as we can see here, that from the pre-arrival stage, employee moves to the encounter stage. From the encounter stage, employees moves towards to the metamorphosis stage. So once that metamorphosis stage has been has employee gone through that stage, then there is a couple of outcomes that can really happen in term after that metamorphosis stage, and that outcomes basically depends on how well adjusted that employee or that new employee is into the new environment. So for example, if the productivity has been increased, if the employee's organization commitment has increased, and also whether the turnover has been reduced or not. So as again, if you just remember what I said in the beginning, that most of the important outcome of socialization process would be to increase in terms of productivity, employees productivity, and organization productivity, stability, and decreasing the employees turnover. Here, we'll talk about the purpose of the new employment orientation. So, for example, why an new employee needs to be oriented. So, definitely, these are all the activities that needs to be introduced to the new employees. And why is that? Because the new employees needs to be adjusted into the new environment. But the big question here is that who is responsible for designing or delivering the new employee orientation. So the role would be, so for example, the first role would be the organizational culture role. So for example, who is responsible? So I think so in this term, the employee should be responsible in terms of learning the organization culture. So the first role would be of employees. So so employee should learn the new organization culture or the new ways that organization is operating. Definitely, there is a role of the CEO, the higher ups of the organization, and there's a key or the fundamental roles of HRM as well in terms of designing or in terms of delivering the whole orientation or the socialization process. But in terms of looking at the organization culture, that how the new employee should learn from the organization culture, or what organization culture will do the new employee. Organization culture basically teaches the new employee the shared meaning or perspective of the organization itself. So for example, the key things that or the key takeaways from the culture would be how things are done here, what matters, what are the behavior that would be or what are the behaviors that would be acceptable, what are the perspective that would be acceptable, what is the organizational politics, how the organization behaves, what are the behaviors, attitudes, or the fundamental thinkings that are kind of acceptable in that organization. For example, what about the teamwork, whether this organization likes the teamwork or not, whether this is independent, whether this organization basically believes in the independent thinking or the coordinated ways of doing things. So these are all kind of all the perspective that organization culture can teach a new employee. In terms of culture, for example, there will be a whole, if definitely if it's a whole formal socialization process, so the socialization process can go both ways. So the big organization or the organization that are kind of considered big in some way. For example, I'm talking about the Google or Apple or the mid-level organization basically have the formal way of having that socialization process. But sometimes those socialization process can be really informal. So for example, sometimes the organization puts you in their shoes and then ask you to kind of merge into that organization culture. So that can go both ways, and it depends on the organization size. It depends on the financial stability of the organization, that how this organization wants you to become familiarized with the culture of that organization. So what is the role of CEO in terms of orientation? Definitely there's the first role would be to welcoming the employees. And what does I mean by welcoming the employees? So welcoming in terms of in providing them the comfort level. So for example, welcoming them in a way that those new employees would feel comfortable in working with that organization. And another important topic is important point is about showing empathy. So think in a way that the new employees basically have some kind of anxiety level or the stress or the fear level that we already talked about. These are the most vulnerable employees at this time. So this is the time that these employees need empathy, and definitely providing the vision of the company. This is the most important thing, because I know it also covers the organization culture in some way. So for example, if the organization mission and vision is not clear to the new employee, he or she is it will be difficult for that new employee, whether for the new employee to adjust into the new environment. So for example, the CEO should be clear in terms of translating the new vision or mission to the employees. So for example, what is being accepted, or what are the behaviors that are being accepted from that new employees, what that CEO or what that organization is basically looking into that new employee. So if that vision is clear, then I think so it would be easier for the new employees to sustain into the new environment. Definitely. What about the role of HRM? So HRM somehow had a dual role in terms of orientation. So for example, there's one role of coordinating role, and then there's a participant role. Coordinating roles is about the telling the new employees about the procedural activities. So for example, how we do the work here. So for example, from where you get your paycheck. So for example, what is the reporting channel? And again, what is the way of filling up your timesheets? Again, what are the HR related activities? What is the pay procedure? What is the procedure of getting the overtime? What is the rate? How you should expect to get the overtime? And then what are the health insurance and benefits about the organization? So it is more about the HR related roles in terms of procedural activities. And definitely there's a participant role in terms of looking the new employees in a big picture. So for example, in terms of offering them the training opportunities, offering them the career development opportunities, offering them in terms of all types of development opportunities that will help them to build their career into that organization. Remember one thing, that the key role of HRM is to retain their employees. So for example, all of the activities, whether it's a small or the procedural type of activities, for example, how to fill up a timesheet, to developing the whole career plan, these are the things that HRM is responsible for or should responsible for. There's one more way or there's one more way, I would say, that where employees can get some idea about the socialization or about the rules or procedure of that organization, and that is basically employee handbook. Most of the organization do have handbooks for the employees. So for example, that handbook tells about the vacation procedures. So for example, that handbook tells about how many hours that employee is expected to work in that organization, how to fill up the overtime sheets, and definitely other procedural activities as well. So for example, who you should report if you're not feeling well, and you're not feeling well in terms of coming to that organization. So all of the reporting procedures is also mentioned in that employee handbook. And sometimes there's some kinds of disclaimers that are also attached into the in that employee handbook. Disclaimers in a way that what employees should not expect. So for example, if I just read out one of the sample disclaimers, it said that no supervisor or other representative of the company except the president in writing has the authority to enter in any agreement for employment for any specific period of time, or to make any agreement contrary to the above. So for example, it said that only president has the authority to engage into the employment process or agreement with the employee, and also it should be in a written format. So for example, this kinds of disclaimer um, has somehow lowered down the confusion. So if there is nothing that is coming from the president, and if it's not in written, so employees should not believe all those things as far as the employment agreement is concerned. Again, what else that employee handbook had? It would be center source for teaching employees company's mission and vision. Definitely, there's a source that tells about what we believe in. It includes the history, policies, benefits, and most of the time the culture of the organization. And somehow, if you just look at that, organization culture is somehow visible from organization and vision statements as well. Uh, Again, the important point from the employee's point of view is that employers must watch the wording, because this is a very important point. If the wording is not clear or confusing in some way, then they can engage into the legal battles with the employees if something happened at the later stage of the employment process. The one area that also includes in the socialization process is about employees training, and also we'll talk about the employees development later in this session. So first of all, what is employee training and what is employee development? I thought it would be easier in terms of understanding if we just clear the confusion at this time. So employee training is more about the focused thing. So for example, employee training is focused on now. So for example, what is being achieved in this next week, next year, 3 months, 6 months. So that is much more like a shorter plan. So employee training is more focused, and is also focused on the short-term gain. So for example, it is typically designed to achieve a relative permanent change in the organization, in the individual, that will improve his or her behavior or performance. So it basically focuses on the shorter version. It basically focuses on the shorter time period. And why I'm saying is shorter, because as we know that there's a whole theory about making the SMART goals. The SMART goals is about making smarter, like SMART goals is about specific, so measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-bound goals. So for example, if employee training needs to be needs to be about achieving that smarter goals, and employee training focus on short-term goals. Again, there's the difference of training can be either on the job or off the job. However, if we try to differentiate from training and employee development focuses on the future orientation. So for example, where that employee will be landing in the next 5 to 10 years. It's more about the talks about the employee career in some way. So for example, employee development talks about if that employee is working in different units of that organization, how that working in different unit helps that organization in their career. So employee development is much more about the future oriented activity, and employee training is kind of present oriented activity. It focuses on now, and employee development focuses on the future of that employee. Then some HRM talks about the training methods that have been used in the socialization process as well. So for example, typically there are two kinds of training process, or I would say there are two big umbrellas that we can put the training methods in. So for example, there are on-the-job training methods or off-the-job training methods. On-the-job training methods is about the job rotation, working in different units of that organization. And definitely on the job training itself means that, for example, if I'm working as an HR employee, so while working on the things that are related to HR, I just somehow gain some kind of experience or expertise into that particular skill. So that is basically on the job training. Then there's a theme of apprenticeships and internships as well. I'll talk about both of these themes in the next slides. Um, then there's a off-the-job training methods as well. Off-the-job training methods typically is about the classroom methodology or the lecture-based methodology where multimedia can be used for the learning procedures, or maybe there's some kind of simulation methodologies that can be used. So it may be off the job in some way, but the whole training process is simulated in a way that employee understand that what I am being trained on, and what my employer is expecting from me after that training. So the whole procedural work or my job procedure is being simulated in some way that I know that what is my job procedures. Again, I thought that it would be easier in terms of understanding that what is internship and what is apprenticeship. So apprenticeship versus internships. So somehow most of the literature talks about that these are two main methodologies in terms of getting the job into that organization, or I would say the entering into the organization. So these are kind of uh, these are some of the ways of getting the job into that organization. Let's start with some of the major differences that what one can find in apprenticeship and internship. So there's a difference of generalization versus specialization. So for example, internships are more generalized in a way. So for example, internships talks about that how things are being done. So what are those things, how that things needs to be done, what are the reporting procedure, and all the nitty gritties of those things. So it is more like generalized in a way. And also internships are for the generalized task as well. On the contrary, apprenticeship basically talks about the specialized category or the task or the skill. So for example, if I need a plumbing task, or if I just want to be really skilled into the plumbing job, uh, apprenticeship is the way to go rather than internship, because apprenticeship will tell me that what are the procedures of plumbing, what should I wear, what kind of environment that I need to go to, what are the safety mechanism, how I start that plumbing procedure. So apprenticeship basically goes deeper and deeper on the same skill. So for example, it is more specialized way of teaching something. Again, apprenticeships are kind of longer term. So the objective of apprenticeship is to transfer the skill. So for example, one is looking for transferring one skill into into the apprentice. So for example, if again as an example, I just quoted that example, if I want to become a plumber, apprenticeship basically tells me the nitty gritties of the whole plumbing process or the whole plumbing skill in some way. So that is much more geared towards the first of a highly technical skills, and it will last for a longer period of time. Again, it can be a difference in terms of pay, because you are engaged with the employer or the person who is giving you an internship for a longer period of time. So for example, if someone is giving you an apprenticeship for a longer period of time, for example, it could be from 6 months to 1 year to 2 years to 3 years. Sometimes the apprenticeship lasts for 3 years. So somehow it has been said that there is a difference of pay as well in terms of internship and apprenticeship. Somehow, for some reason, apprenticeship is basically apprentices are getting more pay. Again, you have to think in terms of the time period as well, and you have to also think in terms of getting a highly skilled or technical job as well. The most important point in terms of getting the pay as well is about the competitive nature of that apprenticeship as well. So apprenticeship is somehow, because it's geared towards getting a higher technical skills. That's why it is more competitive in that way. Definitely, if there's more competition, somehow there's also some monetary benefits that is attached to that as well. Again, there are a couple of differences. Apprenticeship is more about hands-on training. So as I already talked about the gaining higher level skills. So apprenticeship is about gaining higher level skills. So for example, gaining some technical skills. So that's why apprenticeship is mostly hands-on training. There is also a classroom component that is attached to apprenticeship. So for example, most of the apprenticeship most of the organizations that are basically giving the internships are engaged in somehow some kind of classroom plus or hands on the job kind of training. So for example, and that can vary as well depending on what kind of skill is being taught. So for example, if there's something that really needs hands-on experience, so maybe the classroom experience in that particular skill is just 30%, and then 70% is more about hands-on training. But definitely there is a classroom element that is always tied to apprenticeship, and for the internship it may not. So maybe a internship is not at all about the classroom experience. And in the classroom, basically in the apprenticeship period in the classroom, apprentices are basically exposed to the theory of that that skill. So for example, why you are doing this, what kind of benefits of getting that kind of skills, how that skill has been treated in the world per se. So these are a couple of differences between internships and assistantship that basically needs that classroom component with it. Again, sometimes there's a literature that talks about that apprenticeship may get you a job, because think in a way that apprenticeship is about highly technical skills. Apprenticeship is about also classroom training. Apprenticeship is about a long term of that skill. So for and these are all the different factors that helps an employee or apprenticee in that matter to gain or to land up on a job. So once we talked about the training, now I'll just go into the employee development perspective. So let's think in a way that employee development is a future oriented process, first of all, and secondly, it's a longer process in some way. So for example, employee development includes job rotation. Employee development includes assistant to the positions. It's kind of a mentoring or coaching in some way. It may include committee assignments. It may include definitely lectures or seminars or some kind of simulations, or there's one way of doing employee development, and that is basically depends on the decision making of that employee as well, or the motivational level, or to enhance the motivational level of that employee, that we call, or that the HRM text is calling adventure training. So let's see all those components in detail. Job rotation. So as we talked about that, employee development is basically geared or focused towards the long-term process. So job rotation also helps once an employee is future oriented in some way. So for example, job rotation talks about moving employee horizontally or vertically to expand their skills, knowledge, and abilities. As we know that most of the training procedures and most of the development procedure has somehow the component of enhancing the skills, knowledge, or abilities of that employee. So employee development gears towards the future oriented future orientation of the employee. So job rotation helps employee in terms of getting the experience of working in different organization units. So for example, an employee can work into the marketing department, but in the marketing department or in that marketing unit, there would be maybe a sales department, maybe a advertising department, maybe there's a door-to-door kind of marketing as well. So once that employee is being trained into all those areas, it will definitely increase the knowledge and skills of that employee into that marketing arena as a whole. Then there's one way of doing employee development is about assisting to that position. It's more think in a way in terms of coaching or mentoring. So for example, employees are being coached in some specific role. So for example, employees with potential can work under someone that would be a coach or the mentor, so that they become successful after gaining that capabilities. Then there's a component of committee assignments. Committee assignments basically focused on developing the teamwork into the employees. So for example, employees can be a part of a bigger group where they are working as a group member and they are being assigned to solve a real world problem. So that real world problem can be a real problem that that organization is going through. So once that organization try to develop that employee, so maybe that organization puts one or two of the employees or the new employees into that uh, group so that they can have an experience of working uh, in the work so that they have an experience of solving a real world or the real organizational problem as well. And definitely they can also expose to different lectures or seminars, or they can be given an opportunity to present in seminars or to attend some seminars or to be a part of some conferences or lectures or per se. They can go to different management development programs or career development programs, or they are being allowed to be a part of some conferences where they have been exposed to the like-minded peoples where they can gain some kind of expertise by engaging with those people. So simulation and adventure training are also a couple of the ways that employees have been developed. So for example, simulation means exposing employees to the real world problem or exposing employees to the actual problem that that organization is going through. So simulation can be through the case studies, through the decision games, or through the simulators, and also that involves the role plays as well. The main purpose of exposing employees to the real world situation or the actual problem that is the organization is going through is to see or to enhance their decision making skills. Again, adventure trainings are sometimes used to increase or develop somehow employees team dynamics. So for example, one of the ways of developing employees team dynamics is to is to go for the mountain climbing or the paintballing or the survival kind of training. So those kinds of training basically helps employees in terms of team dynamics. These kinds of trainings help employees to become interdependent on each other. That helps employees to understand that those employees basically interdependent on each other. So for example, and definitely if you just see this thing in terms of organizational dynamics as well, somehow some organizations employees output will become an input for a new employee. So employees are basically interdependent on each other as well. So there's a whole network of tasks on which employees are dependent on each other. So I hope now you have a better understanding of the socialization process. Thank you very much.